Good morning. Today I'd like to talk about talking about things. Before we get started, I want to put a content warning on this entire video. This is going to touch on subjects related to self-harm and abuse. I would strongly urge you to consider whether that is the kind of conversation that you are up for right now and to prioritize your mental health. I will not feel bad if this is not a video that you want to consume. And in the description of this video, I have a number of resources that are available to queer people who are struggling with their mental health and might need some help. If you are a participant or a follower of the conversations happening in the romance community, you likely know that this video is in some part about the Addison Beck Madison Devlin controversy that has been bubbling for the past week or so. I'm not going to recap everything that happened with this author and her book, but there is a link in the description to a thread in the romance subreddit that thoroughly summarizes everything, and it is very thorough. So I would even more so encourage you to consider the content warning that I gave at the top of this video if you are going to go into that thread, because there is a lot of links and photographs, summaries, and verbatim descriptions from the book that get into like a very real, very serious abuse and self-harm territory. The bottom line is that an romance author named Addison Beck, who writes dark romance under the pen name Madison Devlin, had an advanced reader copy of a book out to her street team, and one of the members of that street team posted on threads that they were a little confused about romance genre conventions because they had recently read an arc that had the two main characters kill themselves at the end of the book, and that the book called this an unconventional happily ever after. This ignited a firestorm on the romance internet. Many people were rightly, justifiably upset that an author who is a participant in a queer community would write and promote a book that seemingly romanticizes suicide. As more information came to light about this book, it also seemed to give a happily ever after to a child predator. Beck has since deleted her social media, but in the first few days of this controversy, she changed the marketing for this book from dark romance to tragedy, and she did say that she was going to take all of the pre-order revenue for the book and donate it to the Trevor Project. Beck and her PA, with whom she works very closely on these books, became sort of the main character for several days on the romance internet. And a lot of people felt extraordinarily bad about this conversation. First, because this came right on the heels of the Trump administration ending the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration LGBTQ Youth Crisis Hotline. Two, for some people, it felt like a betrayal of the queer community to write a story that seemingly romanticizes and glamorizes the ending of one's life. That particularly intersects with the original marketing of the book as a romance. Three, and I think that it was somewhat under discussed, but just the conversation at all about the book was so amplified by everyone that it was putting self-harm in the ether at a time when queer people are particularly at risk and under attack, and that regardless of the intentions of anyone who was discussing this issue, amplifying it can have very negative consequences for people's mental health. And I think that there was a general perception, and I agree with that perception, that this conversation, insofar as it was a conversation, was not handled with much care. Fourth, there were many people, defenders of Beck, and then also people who maybe didn't know Beck at all, who were concerned about the perception of a witch hunt, of cyberbullying of Beck and readers of dark romance generally. There were many accusations of death threats being sent to the author and to defenders of the author. And it was just overall a very negative conversation, the outcome of which I am not sure is going to be particularly positive in any direction. I want to give a few lenses through which we can understand controversies like this. But before I do that, I want to briefly describe my moral positions here. First, queer people are under attack, and it is dangerous to be a queer person in the world today. Queer people are also not a monolith. And in the description, you will find an essay from a colleague of mine, Matt Mansfield, unpacking this a bit more. But the queer community is made up of many diverse identities, some of whom are under attack more than others. And that intersects with other identities like whiteness, able bodiedness, cisness versus transness, etc. And as you stack up those marginalizations, those oppressions, the mental health of the people with those identities gets worse and worse. And we can see that in the rates of self harm for queer people generally, and then looking at the rates of self harm among, for example, trans people of color specifically. 2, I think that authors are free to write whatever they want. 3, I believe that only governments and institutions can censor works of art, which means that 4, it is also not just acceptable but necessary for communities to have conversations about works of art and whether they find them acceptable or not. And authors bear accountability to the communities that they are engaged with. So while, yes, I believe that authors are free to write whatever they want, that does not mean that they are free to write whatever they want without any consequences. 5, I believe that online communities need to use call ins and community conversations in order to create and maintain the boundaries of what's acceptable inside of that community, absent more typical community structures like leaders, in person forums, etc. But 6, I do believe that more often than not, because of the structure of social media specifically, community conversations that start with call ins do frequently devolve into mob mentality witch hunts, or they can come to feel that way, particularly for the person or people who are subject to the call in. 7, reading, like engaging with any form of art, is inherently political. And I have very little time for people who say it's not that serious. If it's not for you, just don't read it, etc. That is a very head in the sand, privileged position to take toward reading. And particularly if you read about and within a community that is marginalized and under attack, you should at least consider to what degree you want to be an ally to that community and consider the impact of saying this isn't that serious. Finally, 8, I think that most conversations, not just online, but in any forum, would be greatly enhanced if we come to them from the perspective of treating each other with dignity. Now, what does it mean to treat someone with dignity? Reaching back into my college moral philosophy days, treating someone with dignity means you treat them as an end in themselves and not as a means to an end. It means you treat someone with their own agency and their own will in the world, and you don't use them for your own purposes. This gets into the first lens that I want to bring to the table here, which is dignity and instrumentalization. What is instrumentalization? Instrumentalization is when you take someone and you turn them into an instrument. You turn them into a tool for you to use. It is, for me, essentially the opposite of treating someone with dignity. It's treating someone as an object. And not merely as an object, not merely objectifying someone, but as a tool for your purposes. And I think that the deeply negative feelings that people have been experiencing are often attributable to a process of instrumentalization. Queer men who oftentimes feel marginalized in the community, people who have traumatic experiences with abuse and self-harm, felt that Beck instrumentalized their struggles. Other people felt that Beck and this controversy was instrumentalized by people who had an axe to grind against dark romance. It is not good to treat someone else like your own instrument. It is not good to treat someone without dignity. And it is very easy to do that or feel like that is being done on the internet. And this goes back to something I said offhand in a previous coffee chat, which is that quote from the movie Les Jeux Sont Faits, which is, the awful thing about life is this, that everyone has their reasons. Most people float through the world feeling like they have their reasons, but everyone else just does stuff. Everyone else just is who they are. We very rarely afford people, especially on the internet, the same status and grace that we afford ourselves. Because of the oftentimes anonymous nature of the internet and the algorithmic nature of most social media, we frequently don't treat the person on the other side of the screen like they are fully human. Treating people with dignity does not mean treating people with kid gloves, and it doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable. In fact, treating someone like they have agency and a will of their own is the way in which we can hold people accountable. Beck made these decisions for herself. She has agency, she has will. But questioning Beck's position in the queer community, hurling abuse at her readers and readers of dark romance generally, does not treat her or those people with dignity. And talking about social media gets to the second lens that I want to bring to bear on this issue, which is traffic. If you live in North America or any place that has a car culture, you are no doubt familiar with traffic and traffic jams. They suck. It is miserable to sit in traffic not getting anywhere. You get agitated, you get more apt to lash out, you get angry. You definitely don't see all the other drivers as your allies in this situation. You see them as the traffic. They are the impediments to you getting where you want to go. But a very important lesson in understanding traffic, which is also applicable to the internet, is that you, my friend, are the traffic. The people next to you see you the same way that you see them. And why do we have the traffic in the first place? It is because of a bunch of individual, uncoordinated, yet socially constructed decisions. Individual, insofar as every single person made a choice on their own. Uncoordinated, meaning there is no conspiracy, there is no secret that is putting all of the people onto the road at any particular time. There is no discord that is organizing people to all get on the roads at the same time. It just happens. But also, nevertheless, socially constructed. Because while there is no overt conspiracy as to why the traffic is happening when it's happening, there is kind of a covert one. The traffic happens because you live in a suburb that is connected by the road to where you work, and so does everybody else. You leave your house and your place of work at the same time because of the social construction of the workday. You have to be on the road in the first place because of capitalist decisions related to real estate and wanting people to be in offices. So while every person is making individual choices about where they're going to live and what jobs they're going to have and when they're going to get into their cars, they are still subject to social forces that are impacting them, that is contributing to the traffic. To say nothing of the fact that, at least in the United States, we have prioritized the construction of roads for individual drivers versus public transportation. This is the same as social media. When these kinds of debates and discussions happen, they are also largely individual, uncoordinated, but nevertheless socially constructed. Everyone is making their individual choice to post, to comment, to make a story, to make a reply. There usually, although not always, is no secret Discord or community where people are organized into brigades. But the social construction is an even more overt conspiracy against all of us, in that we are acting in the way that the evil tech overlords of these platforms want us to act, which is we are allowing ourselves to get mad, to get frustrated, and spend time on the app. The management and the ownership of platforms like Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, where I'm putting this video, want controversy, not for any particular reason other than it gets your attention. It allows them to sell more ad inventory and to extract more data from you that they can use to enhance their bottom line. The very structure of the places where these conversations are happening make them almost impossible to have as conversations. The third lens that I want to bring to bear is the lens of community. And my position is that There are very few online communities on social media, particularly if it is algorithmic social media like TikTok or Instagram. It's very low cost to join these communities, which means people can come and go even if they really don't belong in a community. There's very little concept of a leader in a community other than people who are the most popular or have the loudest voices. Leaders usually are not purely broadcast, but they are relational. There is very little relationship building that happens in these places, although there is a lot that happens in DMs and in smaller closed group chats. But when we think about the big wide world of everything that you see on your FYP and your stories, that is not a community. But we want it to feel like a community. And that is why the traffic of the controversies that we find ourselves embroiled in and the lack of dignity with which people get treated in those controversies feels so bad. People are hungry for community. People are hungry for relationships with one another. And we get a false sense of that when we come to these places. I wish that it were different. I actually think the Romance subreddit that I referenced at the beginning of this video is an example of a much stronger community. And it's stronger because it is fairly closed down and there are leaders. When they wanted to have a conversation about this particular controversy, there was one thread that had one kind of appointed person who summarized the entire thing, and the moderators of that community checked every comment before they came in to make sure they passed the vibe check. Many, many years ago, I was a member of an online community. I participated in the management of an online role-playing game. And there were many hundreds of people who played in this game. And the way that we decided to manage it is that every few months or so, there would be elections for 3 game masters. Game masters were empowered to make individual decisions for players, but they could be overruled by the other game masters. And there was an ability to recall them, and there were these frequent elections to ensure that the leadership had the confidence of the player base. And when I was in that position, maybe a third of the time in that game, I was participating in the game, and 2/3 of the time I was in private messages and AOL Instant Messenger chats adjudicating things. When a controversy hits the shores of a community that exists solely on an algorithmic app, the floodgates open. There is little to no ability to manage the conversation. And it is a lot to ask every individual person to figure out for themselves how they're going to participate in that conversation. And as I am wrapping up, it's perhaps sounding like I am a bit nihilistic about this, that there are no answers here. And unfortunately, I think that that is true, but I do have some recommendations. Whenever you see a controversy on the internet, I think that you can always stop and ask yourself a few questions before you engage in it yourself. 1, are you in the right headspace to engage in this conversation right now? Are you mad? Are you upset? Are you sad? If you are not in a great headspace, maybe you want to take a breather before you engage in it, just for your own mental health. 2, is what you're going to say something that someone has already said? You don't necessarily need to contribute your own opinion for every issue. And a subset of that, if the controversy or the conversation is focused on a community that you are an ally of and not a member of, can you amplify the voice of someone who is affected, someone who is in the community, as opposed to saying something yourself? 3, do a spot check. Am I treating everybody with basic human dignity? Am I starting from the perspective of everybody has their reasons, everybody thinks that they are the hero of their own story, maybe I don't have the full picture of everyone who is engaging in this conversation? 4, and this is the most difficult and maybe where it is helpful to look to leaders if they exist in your community, is there a theory of change that you have about the outcome of this conversation? Where are we right now, and where after this conversation do we want to be? And is the conversation going to get us there? Your theory of change might be merely boundary maintenance. Our community prioritizes X. This is someone in the community who is against X, so we are going to engage in some appropriate social sanctioning to maintain that boundary. But it also might be the case that You think this community has an issue and it needs to change. If you can't articulate how the conversation and the way that you and others are participating in it will contribute to that change, you should think about whether you should be having the conversation. And finally, I think that it is good to find places of real community if you can. Group chats, Discords, other places that have more of a community feeling, and adjudicate issues there first before going out into the social internet. Finally, I have a few things that I saw in comments to posts related to this issue that particularly bothered me and I just wanted to bring up. First, I saw a number of people saying that posts by people who were concerned with or upset by this issue were a form of censorship, and that those posters were in some cases no better than MAGA or Moms for Liberty. If this is your opinion, I would strongly encourage you to, one, read up on what censorship actually is, but two, consult the first lens that I brought to the table here, human dignity. Do you actually believe that, or are you just upset and you're lashing out at someone who doesn't like something that you like? And I think that it is particularly toxic to throw those kinds of accusations around within the queer community. Two, I saw a number of people who were defending Addison Beck throwing their hands up saying, she apologized, she's not publishing the book, nothing is ever enough for you people, this is cancel culture, run amok. As a general principle, throwing your hands up in the air and saying, this is never enough, is a form of privilege and a form of fragility. And that can be true at the same time that there was almost certainly a mob mentality around the Beck issue and a bandwagoning effect that became quite a loud roar. But the opinion that nothing is ever enough is very closely related to keep politics out of my books. And it is a privilege to live in a world where you can keep politics out of your books. Finally, and I'm not sure that I have a coherent thought about this, but on posts made by commenters on all sides of this issue, I just noticed for the first time something that people do a lot, which is just commenting this or so well said or say it louder, say it for the people in the back. I don't know if this is just knee-jerk expressive agreement or people who have been trained to leave a comment in order to boost a post algorithmically, but when I scroll through something and everyone is just saying this, and there's no contribution, there is no actual like discussion, that contributes to the entire broadcast social media aspect of this to me. When you look at the thread on the romance subreddit, every top level comment was at least a few sentences and examining the issue from some perspective, bringing something to the table. And then back and forth conversation, as you would expect to see on Reddit. Now, Reddit comment threads are not the best place to have conversations, but I think that comments on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube are even worse. But I guess when I see posts that are engaging in conversation around controversies, and there are all these comments like that, it just sounds like a bunch of people all honking their horns. We're all sitting in the traffic, and we are the traffic, and we're all making a lot of noise. And it makes the conversation feel closed. And that for most things, if you encounter them, you need to immediately form a strong, solid opinion and take a side. And while I have strong moral convictions, and I think that most issues do have conclusive, just positions for people to take, I don't expect most people all the time to be able to figure that out on their own. People are struggling. People are barely getting by. It is a lot to ask of people. I think that it is appropriate to ask that of people, but we need to give them scaffolding. We need to give people ways to understand things. And one final thing, for any authors who are publishing a book soon, I would urge you not to in any way incorporate this controversy in the marketing of your book. I think that that will read as extremely distasteful. So take that as some free advice from me. Don't do if you're feeling bad about the Addison Beck controversy, this book has a guaranteed conventional HEA, unlike some other books. Don't do that. Don't do that. This ended up being a very long video where I was working through a lot of things myself. I hope that it is helpful for people who are trying to think through and work through this issue and the issues within the community themselves. I am very open to discussion about the larger perspective that I'm bringing here about how we should understand controversial issues on the social internet, how we should think about communities. I am also open to conversation about the specific issue, but just be forewarned, I will be like, my delete finger is going to be very itchy. I do not want to see acrimonious conversation in the comments of this video. And please, please, please be careful about how you are talking about it and what language you are using. We are all struggling. We are all trying to get by. And I want us to treat each other with dignity and respect. Thank you so much.